Well, please keep that open, John chapter 9. We believe that God inspired every single word in the Bible, so we like to have our eyes on the text of the Bible as we teach our way through it in church. So John chapter 9. As you heard, this tells the story of the man who was born blind, who then says these wonderful words, one thing I know, I was blind, but now I see. It's wonderful because if you imagine his situation, what was it like for him to suddenly be able to see for the first time? Did he know what the word colour meant until his eyes were opened and he could actually see colour? What was it like when previously all he could do was smell things and touch things and hear things and taste things but not see them, and all of a sudden he's got this fifth sense of sight? Suddenly he can see his mum and dad for the first time. Oh, that's what they look like. It must have been an incredible experience. And of course, John uses this as a metaphor for becoming a Christian. And it's a good metaphor because becoming a Christian really does open things up in a wonderful way, and it transforms you in a wonderful way. It's not just a little add-on to your life, but it allows you to see where you didn't even have that sense before. And your perception of everything changes. You see yourself rightly when you have Jesus in focus. You see the world in a different way. God is no longer a mystery to you. Life has a new purpose, and you see the shape of eternity before you, not just this life, when you have Jesus in focus. I was blind, but now I see is something that every Christian can say, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to say. But of course, you might know that saying that comes with a cost. If you claim that you can finally see and you're willing to tell others that, it's going to be difficult if they don't see. And you're going to be thinking, well, why can't they see and why won't they see? And some will resent your claim to be able to see. And they're going to think, well, you Christians say you can see, but actually you're the ones in the dark. You're in the dark ages, you Christians. The rest of the world is what can see. And so that's why our testimony comes at a cost. The world thinks that it's enlightened. We claim to have an enlightenment that the world doesn't know anything about, and the world doesn't necessarily want to know anything about. And so there's this battle over darkness and light, which we see in this chapter. And perhaps that's why the testimony of this man in John 9 resonates with us. He claims, I was blind, now I can see. And then he becomes the first Christian to be cancelled by his culture. And of course, we know the fear of being cancelled. We know the fear of standing out as a Christian and being rejected and despised and shut out and disadvantaged and being the dag rather than the cool person. And no one likes to feel that way because, let's face it, we spend a lot of our lives trying to earn the favour and the respect of other people. That matters a lot to us. It's a hard thing to throw away, even for Jesus. But there is great encouragement in this chapter for us to stick with our testimony through thick and thin, because the fact remains, I was blind and now I see, and that is the most wonderful thing in the world. Now, at this point in John, Jesus is in Jerusalem, and he has already claimed in chapter 8, verse 12, I am the light of the world. And he said, whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And so he claimed that I'm the light of the world, and that led straight away to a big fight with the Pharisees. Who do you think you are? And Jesus basically, in the end, claims to be God at the end of chapter 8, and they pick up stones to stone him, but he slips away from them. But he doesn't go into hiding. He keeps pushing because there is work to do. Because if Jesus is the light of the world, it mustn't be hidden. People need to see it. And so he keeps working. So in verses 1 to 7, we have the works of the light being done. And first of all, we're reminded of the need for the light, that is the darkness in which the world exists at the start. So verses 1 and 2, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? It's an interesting question, who sinned, when they see somebody suffering. And they were right to link suffering with sin, because if humanity didn't sin, then there would be no suffering in the world. It would be a perfect place. It's sin that's wrecked the world. But it's not always right to link specific suffering with specific sin. as if every time you suffer, it's because you've done something specific wrong. Oh, you got a cold, it's because you told a lie the other day. You know, we can't link specific suffering with specific sin like that most of the time. And so Jesus says in verse 3, neither this man nor his parents sinned. In other words, they saw the man and they assumed that he must have a problem. Jesus said, no, that man's condition shows that actually we all have a problem. He's suffering because of what all of our sin has done to the world. We all suffer in different ways. We all suffer at different times. Some people suffer a lot through their life. Others seem to get away without too much suffering. And often there's no discernible rhyme or reason except that the world is a dark place and it's because of human sin. But if the light has entered the world, then there is hope. And there is also work to do. If the world is a dark place and the light has entered the world, there is work to do. And so Jesus goes on to say, this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it's day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Now, when what he says there, he's only thinking as far ahead as the cross. He's saying, while I am here, people need to see the light. He's going to die on the cross, and at that point it's going to go dark. And he's not necessarily kind of thinking beyond that at this point. But of course, from where we stand now, on the other side of the cross, we know that he's risen from the dead and he's given us his spirit. And in a sense, it's daytime again and the work is back on. And again, there's an urgency because we don't know how long we have to tell people about the light. But notice that he says, we must do the works now. And that work is to point people to the light, which is displayed in the people that he saves. He saves us to be a display of the light, of his light. And that's why he says this man was born blind, so that the works of God might be displayed in him, so that he might be saved, and then everyone will see it, and the works of God will be displayed, and the light will be spread. So Jesus could have just healed the guy with a word in a very unspectacular way, but he chooses to heal him in a sort of a puzzling and a weird and quite a theatrical way. So, verse 6, after saying this, he spat on the ground and he made some mud with the saliva and he put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. So there's a bit of kind of theatrics there, and of course it's pretty gross. Would take a fair bit of time to summon enough saliva to make mud, so he must have worked on it for a little while. And then he puts it on the man's eyes, which you kind of think, oh, not very hygienic, but then he sends the man on this symbolic journey to the pool, and the name of the pool means sent. And so the message is that this man was healed by the one that God has sent. And so the works of God are being displayed in this man's healing. The darkness is being chased away by the light. And the light is being paraded through Jerusalem as he comes back seeing. So these are the works of God which Jesus says we must do, being displays of the light of Christ so that others too might see Jesus in what he's done for us. You've probably seen footage of ads for the Fred Hollows Foundation, you know, where Fred Hollows Foundation, it goes to developing countries and cures people of avoidable blindness, because often in developing countries they don't have treatment for their eyes and they just go blind, whereas in our country we could get treatment and we prevent that. And so cataract surgery or something like that, he'll give the person surgery and they'll have the bandages on and then they'll heal up and then they'll take the bandages off and they're surrounded by all their friends and family and they open their eyes and they can see again and everybody's so happy and everybody's celebrating. The sight has come back and it's so wonderful. Well, that is the work that Christians are called to, except of course the blindness that we are here to cure is spiritual blindness. And the means that we use is our testimony to Jesus. We show them Jesus and they're healed. But of course, it's not as straightforward as that most of the time because lots of people don't realise that they're in the darkness. Sometimes people's eyes mistake darkness for light. Spiritually speaking, they're kind of lit up by things that aren't really light. They think they don't need the light. They think I have enough light in my life. But of course, what they think is light is actually darkness. And so there's a lot of sorting through and there's a lot of issues. And so in verses 8 to 34 of this chapter, we have the battle between the light and the dark. So in John 9 here, the man is healed and he sees for the first time, and his spirit is opened up to Jesus, even though he still hasn't seen Jesus with his eyes. When he went to the pool, he was still blind. And yet people can't accept what has happened to this man, or how it happened, or the significance of what has happened. They just really struggle to come to terms with what's going on. And so this man is subjected to 3 interrogations, which increase in intensity and hostility. Firstly, the local crowd, all the people he's lived amongst all his life, they treat the situation with incredulity. That is, they can't believe what has happened. They say, is this the same guy? They actually say, maybe it's just somebody who looks like that guy who was blind. It's his doppelganger. He says, no, it's me. They say, well, how did this happen? He says, well, this guy Jesus, he spat on the ground and he made all this mud and he put it on my eyes, etc., etc. I had to wash in the pool of Siloam. They say, where is this Jesus? He says, I don't know. So they establish the facts. Something incredible has happened, but they can't explain it. How did this happen? Some people are back at this point when it comes to Jesus, that is establishing the facts. They're trying to get the facts right. Was Jesus a real person? Well, it is a fact that he was a real person. All the historians say that. Did he perform miracles? Well, a lot of very credible sources say that he did, including that he rose from the dead. And so if those are the facts, how do we explain that? That's the question. What's your conclusion? And so the second interrogation of this man is from the Pharisees, who ask their questions with great suspicion. Because Jesus did this on the Sabbath when people weren't supposed to work, and he made this mud, which is a form of work, and then he healed this guy, which is work. And by working on the Sabbath, he was subverting their religious system, which may have been the whole point with the spit and the mud and everything else. He's kind of doing it in the face of the Pharisees. And so again, they ask, how did this happen? And again, the man tells them about the mud and the washing and everything else. And then they start questioning the conclusion. Well, he's done a miracle, but he can't be from God because he's breaking the rules by doing it on the Sabbath. But then again, if he was a sinner, how could he possibly have done a miracle? And so they were divided, it says. They really can't make up their minds. And they ask the man what his conclusion is in verse 17. And he says, well, he's a prophet. It's obvious. He is from God. How else would he have healed me? But then they go back to questioning the facts again. Did you notice that? They ask again, is this really the guy who used to be blind? Maybe it's somebody else. And then they interrogate his parents. Is this your son? Was he really born blind? What do you make of this? And the parents say, well, yes, he's our son. Yes, we can tell you he was born blind, but they don't want to draw any conclusions about the fact that he was healed because they know that if they say Jesus is the Messiah, they'll be chucked out of the synagogue and that'll kind of ruin their lives. So they say, oh, just ask him, he's of age. Kind of wimp out, but understandable. So there's this battle going on between the menacing darkness and the light of the truth about Jesus. And people have a choice and they have a lot to lose depending on what they say about Jesus. And so we see them wrestling with this conclusion here in this passage. And that's why it's kind of a long chapter of sort of back and forth and the same questions being asked over and over again, because it's not easy to come to terms with the truth about Jesus. And as we read this chapter, we readers are being invited to examine not only the facts, but also our own motives in examining the facts and our own honesty and courage when it comes to the conclusion about Jesus. Am I willing to admit the truth? You know, sometimes you talk to somebody about being a Christian and you can see the conflict that's inside them. They're sort of willing to accept the facts about Jesus. Yes, I believe that the Bible is that Jesus is who the Bible says he is. They can't deny the facts, but yet they also can't bring themselves to go all the way to the conclusion about who Jesus is, because to admit that would mean giving a lot of themselves away to Jesus and surrendering something to Jesus. Like these Pharisees would have had to surrender so much if they'd admitted that Jesus was the Christ. So they say, oh, well, yes, I believe that, but they won't take the next step. They're worried about the cost. I can only say that if that's you, if you're kind of torn in that way and there is this conflict going on within you, don't go into the darkness. Head for the light. So then the third interrogation is the Pharisees coming back for another round, and it turns out into outright hatred for the man and for Jesus. And the Pharisees, they choose their side, and it's the wrong side. They're not even pretending that it's rational anymore. They just say in verse 24, we know that Jesus is a sinner. They've got no reason for saying that, but they just say it. Verse 25, the man replies, well, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. The facts are unavoidable. And again they say, well, how did it happen? And he says, you really want me to tell you again? And then he gets quite sort of cheeky and lippy. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? And that, of course, pushes them right over the edge. They start hurling insults at him and they claim, oh, we're on Moses' side. We're not on that guy's side. We don't know where he's from. But the man just makes the case, look, I was born blind and he opened my eyes. Does it really matter where he's from? Because if God weren't with him, he wouldn't have been able to do it. And verse 34, to this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. Kind of sad for the man, really, the poor guy. You know, when he was still blind, people looked at him and said, oh, look, he was born blind. Maybe he was steeped in sin at birth. But then he gets healed and people are still accusing him of being steeped in sin at birth because it was Jesus who healed him. So can't really win, but he doesn't care because he's been blessed by God through Jesus. And it seems that the more heat they place on him throughout this chapter, the stronger his convictions get, the stronger he stands for Jesus. There's so much that he still doesn't know about Jesus. He still hasn't seen him with his eyes. But one thing I know, I was blind and now I see. And it's because of that. And it's because of this Jesus. So when you stand up to the haters as a Christian and you hold on to your testimony, that's when you get stronger. And the truth only gets stronger under testing. And the light only shines brighter in the face of the darkness and in the face of the threats. And so the man is cancelled here, but what he has gained far outweighs what it has cost him. He's well ahead. And the next thing we see in the last section is that Jesus rewards his faith and increases his blessing. The man finally gets to see Jesus and experience a fuller salvation. Jesus comes back for him in verse 35. It says, Jesus heard that they'd thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so that I may believe in him. He still hasn't seen him. Jesus said, you have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. So Jesus hears that the man's been thrown out and he goes looking for him because he wants to reward this man's faith. Because Jesus always meets faithfulness with fuller blessing and deeper relationship every time. And the man not only now sees Jesus, but he puts his faith in him more fully. Yes, I believe, I'm now a disciple. And he worships Jesus, which takes things to another level altogether, to actually worship Jesus. He's appreciating the full magnitude of Jesus' greatness, and his heart is now filled with Jesus, and he now has a new purpose and reason for living. And so the extent to which this blind man can now see is very clear. And thinking about those who have failed to see and refused to see, Jesus says in verse 39, for judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. So that's really what's been going on in this whole chapter. That's the explaining verse for the chapter. The blind have come to see more and more clearly as they embrace the light of the world, but those who reject that light only become blinder, even though they think they can see. And the Pharisees then say, well, surely you're not talking about us. Jesus says, the fact that you think you can see, it only makes you even more guilty. There are none so blind as those who refuse to see. So the point is that where we stand with God depends entirely on how we view Jesus, the light of the world. Doesn't matter how good a life that you've lived. There is no true religion without Jesus. There is no true enlightenment without Jesus. You have to have Jesus clearly in focus to truly see. And so the challenge here for us is to see clearly and then to speak bravely. The man here goes from being blind to being the most clear-sighted person around. You know, he sees the facts, he sees the conclusion, he sees through the threats, and finally he sees Jesus so clearly that his heart is drawn to him in worship. And we can pray for a similar effect in our life. Jesus, help me to see you more clearly so that I not only believe, but I fall down and worship, and my heart is full of the desire to worship you. And maybe one thing that helped this man was knowing that what he was saved from. Now, I was blind, but now I see. How terrible is it to be spiritually blind, to be in the dark, to not see life properly, to not see yourself properly, for God to be a mystery, to not see eternity, to just totally be in the dark. It's such an awful way to be, without hope and without God in the world. But Jesus is the one who can make us see. And if he does so, if we see clearly, then we will also speak more bravely. If you can see, if Jesus is in focus, then you will see that it doesn't matter what the cost, you'll speak up for him. You can cancel me if you want to, but I have the light and I can't deny him. And I was blind, but now I see. And that is the most wonderful thing in the whole world. So let's respond to God now by praying, and I'll just pray the prayer that's at the bottom of your outlines there, which you can make your own. Heavenly Father, you sent your Son Jesus to be the light of the world. May he be the cure for my spiritual blindness. As I'm prone to confusing darkness for light, may I see Jesus more and more clearly, give my allegiance to him, and choose to be on the side of light. As I believe and worship and testify to him, may your works be displayed in me. In Jesus' name, amen.